Oh, he's excited. He's excited.
Let me think. I'll just sit right here on this couch.
Have you started yet? Oh, my name is Barbara Sykes. My date of birth is 1/3/39. I was born in Germany, in Kassel, Germany.
Born Richard Sykes, Richard E. Sykes, and I was born in Gainesville, Texas, north of Dallas, and I'm 82 years old, and I was born in 1933, and I grew up in Houston, Texas, and then moved to Austin after we were married in 1968, and my nickname is Dick.
Right here.
What is that?
Scotch and water.
And I'm a bourbon drinker when I'm not drinking Dr. Pepper.
Oh, I was born in Kassel because I guess that's where my dad was working at the time. He was a minister, and he lived in Berlin, and then he moved to Kassel, and I was born in 1939, just before the war started. And we lived there for a short time because during the war my dad went to Russia to be with the troops as a Lutheran minister, and he told my mother to take her family to Höxter, where her parents lived, because it was a smaller town and he felt like we were safer there than in the big city where we were living at the time. So I spent my first 3 or 4 years in Höxter with my grandparents and my mother, of course, and my sister and my brother.
I was born in Gainesville, and my father, my grandfather was, Willie T. Sykes, was an engineer. And by that I mean not an engineer as we understand today, but an engineer that drove trains. And he worked there, and his family was born in that area and of Gainesville, and my father and mother lived in Gainesville. My mother worked as a telephone operator when she was very young. My mother and father got married when my mother was 16 and my father was 17. And they got on his motorcycle and drove to Fort Worth and got married by Justice of the Peace. And then sometime thereafter they moved to a place west of Fort Worth called Thurber, and he worked there as a timekeeper in the bookkeeping department. And then they moved back to Gainesville, and I was born in Gainesville, and then he went to work for the Texaco Oil Company and moved to Houston, Texas, and that's where I grew up.
Uh-oh.
Shall I relate the story?
You go tell, and then I'll tell my side of the story.
I was in Germany in the Army, and there was a woman who was an American woman, and she had married a German man who was the first violinist of the Boston Philharmonic, and he died, and she tried to live on his pension in America, but it was too small, so she moved to Germany, to his old hometown, and she could live very well on his pension there because the German mark was much less value than the dollar. And so she formed an English club. She was well connected with all the officers there at the Army base. She formed an English club, what she called the English Club, and the purpose of that was so German students could meet American students, and they could practice their English or German or discuss politics, and then we would have dances there. And so I was on leave, and I got back, and a friend of mine said, "There's a new girl at the English Club." And Barbara had just come back from the Sorbonne in Paris, and she was the new girl. And so I had just come back from southern Germany in Bavaria, and I had a Tyrolean hat on with a big feather, and I probably had a couple of drinks too many, and I thought I was just the grandest thing in the world, and she was sitting down there, and she was the grandest thing in the world. So I made goo-goo eyes at her and danced and.
We didn't dance the first time. Okay,
And then so would you let me finish?
Yeah, but it's not true.
It is absolutely true.
No, not the first time.
So we had a wonderful time, and we met and we dated for 11 or
10 months.
10 months, and we decided that we wanted to get married, but I wanted to come back to America and be separated from her just to make sure it was the real thing. And it was, and so I guess 11 months later.
10 months later.
10 months later we got married. I went back to Germany, and her father married us in the church there.
Okay, my side of the story.
All lies.
It's all lies. No, the English club is correct. And Frau Höniger was her name. And she rented a place in a hotel or in a restaurant, and we had a room by ourselves. Each week she met there with the American soldiers and German students. And I had just come back from France and broken up with my German boyfriend. And one of my friends said, let's go to the English club. I said, okay. So he and I went to the English club. And the following week he came by and he said, let's go to the English club, and we went again. And that's when Dick showed up, because one of his buddies said, there's a new girl in the club, you need to find out. So that's how we met. And he was the biggest show-off you could imagine. I thought, this guy just really, you know, he was sitting across the table from me. There were about 30 people. And Dick was on one end of the table and I was on the other end. And he picked on me and just it was so, I mean, obnoxious. And so then the next week we went again, and that's every once in a while she had a record player and we would dance, not usually, but every once in a while. And so he asked me to dance, and then he said, I'd like to take you out, and I said, well, I cannot take you to my house because I don't want my parents to know I'm dating an American. So we met somewhere, and that's how we started. And then he would come and call on me almost daily, pretty soon. And the first 2 weeks of the month, he had enough money where he would wine and dine me. But the last 2 weeks of the month, he had no money because he spent it all the first 2 weeks.
On you?
On me. So we ended up staying at my house and listened to the radio, and my mother would fix sandwiches and stuff like that. And he had a false pass. So my dad said, I don't know about that. He has a fake pass because that let him leave the base every day, almost every day. So he wasn't too sure that was a good thing to date somebody with a fake pass because that's not too good. But anyway, we made it. We dated for 10 months, and then when he came to America, he called me one time because people said, oh, he's not going to come back. He's an American. He won't be back. But he called. And in those days, that was a big deal when you made a long-distance call. So eventually, a friend of his brought the engagement ring at Christmas time, and we decided to get married in May. So. Okay, yeah, and so we had the night before we partied till about 2 or 3 in the morning. That's okay, that's part of the life. He wants to know how it was. So, and the next morning at 9 o'clock, Dick comes to my house, all nervous about getting married. Wedding was at 2:30 in the afternoon, and I was still asleep. But my mother had to give him some tranquilizer and some, did she give you some alcohol? A glass of wine or something? Because he was so nervous about all this. We got married at 2:30 in the afternoon, and then we had the wedding reception and the dinner at my parents' house. It was catered to the house.
How would I?
Oh my gosh! It's getting very personal.
She's short. She has an accent. She is, I felt at the time, she looked an awful lot like, in her younger years, Brigitte Bardot, who was a famous French actress and who was just beautiful. And I think Barbara is one of the most beautiful women I've known in my life. So I would say her beauty. She is very typically German, though. She's very factual, unemotional by and large, and sometimes a little too literal.
Well, but she's also smart.
She's smart. She told me to say that she's smart.
No, he always says that. He always tells me, I married you because you know,
Because you're intelligent.
But yeah. No, he's a good husband. He's a wonderful provider and father, and he loves to tell stories. He's very.
And who's the one who's doing all the storytelling tonight?
No. But you normally do, and he's just a performer in a way. You know, he loves women, and he conquered my mother. So that was an important thing for me to marry him. My mother liked him, and that was important at the time. You know, well, he's a good man. So
I appreciate that.
well, you are. Goodness, I don't know.
I think that we share a Christian belief, and I think that that's what's made our marriage strong, because in every marriage there's always a lot of ups and a lot of downs, and there are times when you just want to wring their neck, and she wring my neck and I wring her neck, but we always came back to the fundamentals of our Christian beliefs, and that's really, I think, the anchor that holds the boat together.
Yeah, it's basically, I agree with that. But then I remember living at my grandparents' house with my mother, my brother, and my sister, and they had an underground cellar, and whenever the sirens went off, we would go into the yard, and they had an underground. We would go into the cellar until the sirens stopped, and we'd get back out. And I have pretty good memories of those days, because my grandparents had a pretty nice house and a big garden, and my grandfather grew a lot of vegetables, and like the split peas we had tonight, or the green, he had those in his garden, and fruit, and we would go pick them. When my grandparents weren't there, we would go out and pick them and eat them. What else? And then I remember when the war was over, and somebody came to the house and knocked on the windows at night, and they said, the English are coming. And so they packed up all the kids, and my grandparents and my mother and her sister, we all left the house and walked on the highway to the country, to somebody's house, to be safer than in the city. And I remember the fires in the background from the bombings, because some of the filling station and places like that were hit, and you could just see the fires. And it was kind of scary. I mean, very scary.
Second World War.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it forms your whole life, I think, when you grow up under the circle. I remember being hungry. I remember, you know, we would each have, I always tell the story, we'd have a piece of bread, and we would see who could last the longest on eating one slice of bread. And I had my first piece of chocolate when I was 6 years old. And I had my first banana when I was 8 or 9 years old. I mean, these are things I remember. It was not an easy life, but we didn't know any different, so it was okay. But that probably makes our thinking differently now when we see our kids or grandkids having so much and really not appreciating all they have, because it's a different life.